emphasis is going to be a lot on spiritual journey and path and where Heart to Heart has been, where it is, and I just want to draw your attention to a little bit of where we're going as an organization. So a little bit about where we're headed as an organization. We're really excited about kind of two areas where we've been given the opportunity to focus on. One is just on our efficiency as an organization. Some of the in-house kinds of things that we've been describing as working on the work. And as you know, Father Norm and Larry have poured their hearts and souls into this organization over the years. And one of the things that we're most excited about is expansion with new facilitators that we're trained. And I see Don Litchie's here this morning, and Kathy Shu is back there, who went through a facilitator training process with us over the past year. And we're excited to have 8 new facilitators who will allow us to expand the work of Heart to Heart, so that it's not just on the shoulders of 2 individuals, but a larger team that is able to get out and offer our services to the wider community. And so you can go to our website. We've got information about those new facilitators listed on there, and we're just excited about the ways that they were able to get out and meet those needs.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I've even got notes. I'll kind of look at them. It's good to be here, and let me start by saying that right away, I'm so grateful for everybody here, for the organization, and we've often called Heart to Heart an organization and a movement. We talk about in any organization, and maybe me coming from church background, you need structure and you need spirit. You need both. And I think Jeremy was touching on that organization, that being effective in what we do and how we do it, but also, as Don also added, that spirit underneath it all. Because sometimes you could have deadening structure, and sometimes you can have spirit that goes all over the place and doesn't land anywhere and doesn't have any focus. And I know for me, coming together with that notion of structure and spirit, or that notion of what we do as a ministry of making a difference in the world, has always meant a lot. I want to add, in terms of with Jeremy too, last night I had the wonderful opportunity, and if you haven't seen today's Beacon Journal, you can see an article on the front page. Jeremy and some others hosted in Highland Square an opportunity to bring diverse people together, black and white, young and old, mixed faith traditions and all of that, to really talk about what some people were feeling in this last week around the whole issue of race and what it means to be human, what it means to come together, and what it means to better understand one another, have stronger connections with one another, not live in separate universes. And I know for me, that was very powerful. And it really was, in a way, what Heart to Heart is all about, because the conversations there were open, and they were honest, they were considerate, and people shared a lot of feelings and shared stories with one another. From the very beginning in Heart to Heart, we said, when we do come together and even talk about that inner life, how do we get in touch with our own and each other's story? Because so often when we come together, we can be there with each other with our resumes. Here's all I've done, and here's what I've accomplished, and here's where I graduated from, and there's a value in that. But we all know that doesn't tell that much about anybody. Again, not denigrating it, it's important what we've done. But that underneath who we are, what are we thinking? What are we feeling? What are we hoping in? What are we dreaming about? What are we fearful of? What are we confused about? And from the beginning, being able to make that connection. And I'd say it started right away for me. And it's amazing that we remember this date, April 30th, 1986, 30 years and 3 months ago. This lawyer came into my office at St. Martha, where I had just been a pastor for about 8 months. I became pastor in the previous August. And he wanted to talk about some stuff. Well, you know, when you're in clergy, lots of people come in and you have conversations with them. And so we started to talk, but it was very unusual because Larry is a rare breed. Now that can mean anything, right? Larry is a rare breed. But what happened was, as we talked about some church stuff, he started asking me some questions. Now wait a second here. I'm the church person. You know. No, he started asking, well, Father Norm, what are you excited about, or what are you looking forward to, or what really moves you internally to be who you are and to do what you do? Do you have any dreams in the future and all of that? And how you doing anyway? How you feeling? I know clergy can get overextended. So, you know, he was asking questions of concern and encouraging me to give a heartfelt response, you know, and I have to admit, and I'm a pretty open guy, I was like kind of surprised at that, and you know, I didn't even know this guy, and you know, when lawyers start to ask you a lot of questions, you wonder where that's going to go anyway, but I could see he had a genuine interest in knowing me. A genuine interest in knowing me, and a genuine interest in connecting in a heart-to-heart, not just a head-to-head kind of way. And that moved me, that touched me. And I thought, and I really believe this, a lot of people here come out of Christian background, whatever your background, that there can be what I call God moments. Or moments that in which the Spirit, Christians may use Holy Spirit, others may human spirit, whatever, but the Spirit really moves us in some setting, in some situation. Like a lot of people were moved last night when they brought those people together to talk about some issues in our day. And so, you know, I really sensed the Spirit moving in me, and even though it was just one conversation with a fella, I thought, this seems like it's going to be more than just this time together today. In fact, another interesting thing, and again, however it unfolds, I remember he came in the afternoon, and I usually pretty busy. I usually had appointments an hour apart, so 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, probably came around 3. And you know, we were still engaged, but I thought, no, we're going to have to break it off because I have a 4 o'clock appointment. And we're not going to be able to go into the depth that I saw we were headed. And so the parish secretary said, oh, your 4 o'clock appointment canceled. So it was interesting, in that next hour we took another step. And he began to ask the questions, well, where are we going to go with this? What are we going to do? And I remember thinking, I've just been a pastor 7 months. He said, well, do you know, I'm still learning the ropes. And he's talking about, well, maybe there's stuff in the community. And I remember saying, and he still teases me about this, and I think I tried to say it tongue in cheek. He said, what do you want to be? I said, I just want to be a simple, humble parish priest. I don't know how humble that was saying it, but anyway, and he said at the time, and in a positive way, not saying, well, you know what, I wonder if there's maybe even more in store for you. You know, and as I said, I was kind of taken aback by that because, hey, I'm just a pastor 7 months, and I'm just getting grounded here. And St. Martha on North Hill, where I grew up, wasn't Catholic at the time, but became Catholic and came to this parish, and excited about that. But we decided, and again, that prompting, you know, how often, one, to be open to the Spirit, and we talked about, hey, why don't we get together for breakfast next week at Country Kitchen, you know, and that was good, because a lot of times we have encounters with people, and they just come and they go. We thought, well, that was an interesting conversation, but the very fact that, hey, maybe we need to trust and be open to what further might unfold here. And we know that in any relationships, friendship, people eventually marry or something. They're in situations, there's like, hey, let's see where this is taking us, where the Spirit I call holy, is taking us. And so we met the next week. And the next week, you know, in the beginning of May of 1986, we're drawing round circles and talking about different work settings and different systems, and how this faith of ours, because that's what Larry began to explore, how can this faith of ours impact people in work? and how so often people have a separation between work and faith and spirituality, and thought about that. And I thought about my own life. By that time, I had been a parish priest, 12 years. And I remember feeling good that I get a lot of feedback that people say, Father Norm, when you preach to real everyday life. And we appreciate that. You're not up here ethereal. You're not just being theological. You're looking at Scripture and Jesus and gospel values. But again, how do they play out in the midst of everyday life that can be messy, ambiguous, that can be where we really live every day? And what hit me, an awareness when he started talking about work, I realized in 12 years, hopefully a lot of what I preached could be applied to work, but I don't know that I ever talked about work, people's work, or even used that. I mean, that wasn't on my horizon. That a lot of times as clergy, you see the people as parishioners, and you forget, hey, they're here an hour or two a week. If they're a volunteer, they may be here a few more hours, but their life is out there in the world. And so as a pastor, I was more preoccupied with how do I get these different parishioners active at the parish? And then say a few things that can affect, hopefully, their personal life. So what hit me when Larry and I met several times thereafter was, wow. First of all, I never used to even ask people what their work was, because I thought I don't want to be biased, oh, you're an engineer, oh, you're a machinist, I don't want to think one's better than the other. So I don't know people's work. And then it hit me, I ought to know people's work. That's a part of who they are and a big part of where they spend most of their life and how faith can engage that. So that struck me. Plus the other thing that struck me was, wow, I need to not simply see parishioners as how do we get you actively involved in this parish. Yeah, that's a good thing. But I thought the real mission is the parish to the world. And so what hit me is more, how do we, any of us in church staff or other settings, how do we affirm, equip, and support people for their daily life ministry out there in the world, where they spend most of their time, and where work's a big part of that. And that was a change in how I looked at things. And one of the things we've seen from the very beginning in Heart to Heart, or in any conversion story, whether Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, it's often the conversion is seeing things differently in a way to respond. So instead of seeing people as, how can I get you engaged here? Seeing people is, what can I do and what can we do together to support you in your daily life? And taking that, then we also began. We brought together a few other people, and that's important from the beginning. The other thing I knew, even with Larry, pretty much I was an only child growing up. And by temperament, even though I'm very extroverted, I know you're surprised about that, but I'm very extroverted and connected, I have tended to be a more independent person. And when you're a Catholic priest, hey, you're taking you and you're going from place to place to place. And so kind of I'm there and I'm going to make it happen and everything. But when I met Larry and we started to talk and became friends, good friends that not only shared agenda and goals, but shared our lives with each other, talked and prayed together, then I realized, wow, now I get why Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. That relationship is at the heart of it. And relationship is at the heart of any religion. I know in the Judeo-Christian religion, you can talk about rules and rituals, but the heart of it is relationship. Jesus, as the Jew he was, and the Christian foundation of that said, hey, it comes down to loving God with your whole being and loving your neighbors yourself. Relationship. And that too. So I thought, wow, I'm not really in that many deep relationships where there's a mutual sharing. Not I'm the clergy and I'm helping you. So that was new for me and very good. And I know, and we both said this, in 30 years, if we hadn't been in a friendship with one another, if I was doing this by myself, I'd have probably been done in 10 years. I knew a fellow, Father Art Baranowski, who did some stuff on small Christian Christian community. He went around all over the country to encourage parishes to have small faith-sharing groups. And he came to St. Martha. But when I talked to him, because he did this all by himself, knowing how Larry was, I asked him, how are you doing? How are you feeling? He said, I have a real mission for this, but he said, I'm so lonely. Because I just go from place to place to place, and I'm the priest in the country that does this small Christian community and wrote a book about it. And I thought, wow, I don't want to be that. And I think the Lord, again, calls us to connection. So I'm glad that Larry and I together did this, and then drew a lot of other people, and eventually a board. But first it was a steering committee, and we came together. And again, one of the first things we did, and a lot of you who've been in heart-to-heart groups know this, we first of all shared stories with one another. We heard about each other's life. We'd ask, tell us a little bit about your growing up years. How did that impact you? What are your hopes and fears? What really stokes your fire? When you look back, what's a situation or a person who's had a huge impact on you and why? Wow. When we share those stories, again, the commonality happens, just like that was happening last night with this mix of races. Let's not just debate or talk about, basic principles about how we're going to make this country better. Let's get to know and understand each other, because isn't that at the heart of what we need to do in family life, in work life, wherever we are. And so we went that way too. Another piece that I think I came to and very conscious of, I mentioned earlier, I think we live in a culture still, and faith traditions emphasize this and the culture emphasizes this, a sense of the separation of the sacred and the secular. So sacred work, that's what clergy do. Goodness knows you wouldn't say what a lawyer does is sacred, We do ministry. They don't, But that's the mentality. Or a good businessman who cares about his business and his employees, or a woman who's leading, we know, a not-for-profit or another business that says, hey, relationships matter here, and that's what I want to foster. That's sacred stuff. Anytime you touch the life of another in a way that fosters goodness and love and integrity, that's sacred stuff. And so recognizing, for me, that this, and calling the people in the parish to the spirituality of everyday life. It's not just, the spiritual stuff is what I do on Sunday morning. Or, I remember a good example of this, and this is one example of many of them, but a fella who went to a mission, heard about the spirituality of everyday life. He began to see things differently, a conversion again of mindset. And what he said was, he was always excited because on Wednesday nights, he led a Bible study at his church. And he thought, and during the week, he was a supervisor at a workplace. But he said, my sense of purpose was I look forward that Wednesday night I could do the Lord's work, because I could lead this Bible study and I could foster community among the people who were gathered. And he felt good that he was doing that. But after a mission, he said, my gosh, I'm a supervisor in a department. I have a big influence on lots of people, and I've never thought of that as God calling me to do the work there. He just didn't think, Wednesday night was a spiritual activity. And he had a change in his way of seeing things, and then a change not only in what he did as a supervisor, but how and why he did it. Because he saw the Lord was calling him there to be a supervisor with great integrity. And Wednesday night he was always trying to foster community. He wasn't doing that at all at work. And when he went through this mission, he said, wow, I need to be doing that at work. Part of being a supervisor is foster relationships in this department in terms of how people work together. So he had a shift in thinking and was excited about that, because he saw his purpose, his spiritual purpose wasn't just once a week on a Wednesday night, but now it's every day. He could wake up every day and feel that in a way he was partnering with God in doing something good in that day. in fostering the kind of gospel values or spiritual values that are part of all religious traditions. So seeing that in the Christian scriptures, there's that phrase that I love in Ephesians. It says, there is one God and Father of us all, who is over all, works through all, and is in all. You know, again, do we believe that? That presence is always there to tap into and be open to. Finally, I just want to make a point that this whole thing of diversity and appreciating each other's differences, that I think, again, whether it was last night or what we're looking at, we can talk about racial, there's personality differences, there's gender differences, there's ethnic background, there's all kinds of ways we're different that we all know at times can irritate each other. But recognizing how do we take those differences, I believe our Creator loves diversity. Look at the diversity in creation and in us. And how do we see and experience that in a way that enriches one another? Obviously, for us, that includes also in the workspace as we look at that. And one thing with that, and then I'll wrap this up, that I realize another concept that has struck me was, some of you may know the notion of shadow, or the notion of the blind spots we can all have, you know, that we don't see. And dealing with the number of leaders, just using an example of this, and how blind spots can get in the way. We can be blind about race. We can be blind about how men and women treat each other. We can be blind about a lot of things, and of course we don't know it because it's a blind spot. Unless we're in those heart-to-heart conversations where people maybe help us to see. But just a quick example of this, I can remember we were at an apartment, and one of the supervisors basically had talked about how she was available to all the people at work. Her door was always open and she was available and everything. And then somebody told us in the group, they said, well, she's available, her door is open, but she's not approachable. When you go in there and say something, she gets upset. And she didn't see that. And she thought things were good, and they didn't tell her because she was the power person, you know. And so eventually when we talk with people, the good thing is she was open to hearing that later and realizing, wow, what a blind spot I had. I thought I was the greatest leader because my door's open. But when people came in with suggestions, she would get defensive and take it like, well, don't you think things are good around here already? And not realize, no, this was somebody coming and saying, hey, it's good. Here's some ways we can be better. We all need to look at our blind spots. And I think that's huge. In the racial issue, it's huge in just about everything I've ever dealt with. And so, you know, self-awareness is a big piece in heart to heart. How do we get more aware of our strengths, of our gifts, of our limitations, of that shadow side, that where maybe we get defensive and need to see, and get through that and be glad that we're diverse, because we bring to each other that great diversity and each of us a perspective, because too often we think my perspective is the only one, and it isn't. So, hey, I'm done. I'm glad God's part of it all, and I'm going to introduce you to that lawyer. Larry the lawyer, we call him. Larry the lawyer.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
You know, maybe we ought to start, or I ought to start where Norm just left off, with self-awareness. Maybe things I've learned about myself. I'm sitting here weeping, reminiscing, going back 30 years. And maybe even trying to stuff the tears a little bit, you know. But that inner voice always tells me, don't you ever stuff that again. Be true, be real, be you, Larry. And let yourself flow out into that world in which you live and you move and you have your very being. I'm a pretty emotional guy. I guess sometimes I get pretty intense, and that could be even scary. People accuse me of having the look. Or boy, if you sit down with Larry, he's going to probe you. That's because I need to know you. Because I really didn't know myself at one time, and it was killing me. Literally, it was killing me. You know, I was reminiscing, Norm, and I've talked about this. Maybe it's because of the stroke that I suffered, and after that, you know, I worked with a lot of disability groups and even brought Norm into that setting quite a bit. And I remember one time we were supposed to be speaking at the burn unit over at Children's Hospital. You know, sometimes when you're speaking, you know, the ego, you know, who's going to show up, you know, or that kind of thing. Is anybody going to show up? You know, we went out to the burn unit to speak, and when we got there, there was one person. The mother of a child who was recovering in the burn unit over at the hospital. You know, I remember I was expecting, you know, how do we present to her? You know, what is our presentation to her? You know, and it was like God was saying, it's not so much about the presentation, it's about being present with her. And it's not so much about anything you have to say. It's about what this dear, dear lady had to say to us. All you need to do is sit down and have a conversation with this dear woman who is frightened, unsure, in a healthcare system which was strange to her, and in love with a child that was suffering terribly. Be with her. What a lesson that was. Be with her. No time for ego. Time to be human. I'll never forget that, because it was all about the conversation. It was all about being true, being real, being with in this moment in time where we came together. You know, prior to meeting Norm on that day, April 30th, it was within a couple of years of my having suffered that stroke. You know, as Jeremy said, you know, and I appreciate you, Jeremy, the man that you are, the minister that you are, and hopefully Norm and I in some way have encouraged you that you can do it. But you are doing it. And I was thinking of this neuropsychologist who was challenging me in my recovery. Be true. Be real. Be you, Larry. You can do it. You know, we often think of disability in the context of mental disability, physical disability, and as I was recovering from the stroke that I suffered on December 13th, 1984, indeed I had some physical disability, and I worked through it pretty readily, thank God, and thank the therapist, and thank a whole lot of beautiful old people who were with me in our recovery group, which we called the Stroke Club. And oh, how they challenged me. You know, I was in there having my own pity party. Why am I here? What am I doing here with all you old, crippled people? Although I was crippled myself. And what I didn't know, I didn't appreciate from a self-awareness point of view, was how spiritually and emotionally crippled I was myself. I was wounded, not by the stroke. I was wounded going back to the time when my father died when I was 15. One of 6 children, and he suddenly dies, and he's gone. And oh, I was so pissed. But the well-meaning people, be a man, Larry, don't cry, Larry, tough it out, Larry, and I stuffed it. And that was the beginning of the stuffing for me. Through the divorce that I suffered, through the separation from my kids when they were 7 and 4. Now 47 and 43. Wow. And I'll never forget a neuropsychologist looking at me, really encouraging me. You can do it, Larry. You got to go deep, Larry. You got to flush it, Larry. He said, you know, Larry, you've buried so much of your feeling and so much of your spirit over the years that it finally erupted right behind your ear. You know, I'd been to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, had any number of tests, any number of needles stuck in my body, any number of colored dyes going through my system, you know, just to find out what caused the stroke in this seemingly healthy 35-year-old guy. And that's as good a diagnosis as I heard from anybody, because I had stuffed it. And it was time to be true, to be real, to be authentic. You know, suffice it to say, I had one heck of a spiritual and emotional awakening in my life. And when I met Norm, it was shortly after having this experience. Well, okay, God, what do I do with this? You know, along the way, somewhere I said, I need help. It just made space for this presence beyond me. Call of God, higher power, for me, Jesus Christ, ultimately, when I came to know the man who actually lived 2,000 years ago. And part of my spiritual journey was including so many beautiful people in my life of diverse religious traditions who just simply would be with me when I ask the questions. Not to indoctrinate me, not to impose some religious trip on me, but just to be with me. And to recognize that the questions that I had came from a place that was running real deep in me. And I needed some answers. For me. What are you questioning right now in your life? How are the questions running for you right now? In what direction? Is it where? Where are you leading me, God? Why are you taking me there, God? Why am I in the midst of this right now, God? Why me? Why me? And I always remember a fellow who could not talk in my stroke club when I was doing the why me thing. He held up a sign and he was writing and it said, why not you? I warned you, I get passionate. And I almost quit the legal profession because I couldn't reconcile having this spiritual awakening with this work that I was doing. You know, I'm not knocking my profession. You know, but as Norm said, there aren't a whole lot of people out there in the world that think that the practice of law is a spiritual endeavor. You know, and there is that sacred secular dichotomy. Oh, the work that Father Norm does, that's sacred, and indeed it is. Or the ministers or the rabbis, the work that they do, that's the sacred stuff. The rest of us just bust our butts and maybe on a weekend worship experience in some house of worship, maybe that's our spiritual life. The rest of the time we're all about doing our jobs. And I almost quit the profession because that's what was running through my head. And it hit me, there's something wrong with this. And I had this divinely inspired sense of God saying, Larry, do what you are doing. You have a vocation. You've been called. Of course, for me, being raised in the Catholic Christian tradition, that word vocation, that was the priests and the nuns and the monks. They had the vocations. You know, the rest of us had jobs. And we elevated them and denigrated what we do. And I laughingly say, and I've shared this story, it's almost like I said, me, a vocation? God, that ain't the way I learned it. And I know when they're praying for vocations in church, they're not praying for more lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, Larry, you're a missionary. Huh? A missionary? Me? No. Aren't they the people that go off to the far corners of the earth and feed the pagan babies? Me? And then a dear friend of ours, Sister Jean Lardy, was home from El Salvador one time, and I was sharing that experience with her and the mystery of it. And she says, you know, Larry, you're no less a missionary than I am. We're just in different places. And the people that may come to your office, come into your work life, may be no different when it's all said and done than the peasants that I serve down in El Salvador. You see, Larry, they hunger for affection. Or maybe they thirst for justice, or they're in this system which is strange to them. Loneliness. And it was Mother Teresa that said, the greatest poverty in the world is loneliness. And along the way of my recovery, I finally claimed how lonely I was. How I was so disconnected from it all, from my family. At the time of the stroke, my second marriage was in trouble. Climbing my ladder of success, in the 12-step programs, they might call it the bondage of self. Feeling I was connected, but in reality so disconnected. So I decided to stay put, and it's about that time I decide I got to re-enter the church, and then I meet this guy.
And we're both in trouble.
And I was ready for whoever I talked to who represented the church, because I had some issues with the church. And I didn't want to hear a bunch of rules. I didn't want to hear all this stuff. I wanted somebody to be real with me. And maybe that's why I wanted to set the agenda by asking the question. And I'll tell you, my friend Norm Douglas was real. He was true. And this guy from North Hill and this guy from South Akron, these 30-somethings sat down and had a conversation. And in some ways, he was welcoming me back into the church. At the same time, I was encouraging him to be out in the community. There's a place for you in that community. It's not all about the world of church. Church is out there. Or as Norm says quite often, is the parish our world, or is the world our parish? And we were introducing each other into our worlds. Isn't that what we need to do out there? Don't we need to introduce each other into our worlds, into our cultures, into our hearts, into our lives, into the reality of being human? Isn't that really, when it's all said and done, all about? And in the midst of that, maybe, just maybe, you experience the divine, the spirituality of the human condition? I better shut up. By saying, part of this is what have you learned? Where's this going? Yesterday when we were reminiscing, I remember when we first got involved in Heart to Heart. I was doing stuff I'd never done before. I can remember kneeling on the corner at Main and Market with a cross on Good Friday. And looking back, what the hell were you doing? I'm doing all over, we go to Romania. Romania? You know, it's like God saying, I'm going to move you. You know, you invite God into your life. God will move you to places that you may not want to go. With people you may not want to be with, but boy, what a blessing. You know, people say you're a stroke survivor, Larry, and indeed, it's the blessing of my life. But I just didn't survive. It's not all about survival. There's too much people trying to survive out there. We need to thrive. We need to be true, to be real, to be ourselves. You know, and he and I can do that together. To be true and be real and be friends and be companions. I often ask people who talk to me, whether as a lawyer, you know, and the attorney-client privilege, or maybe as a spiritual director, you know, they feel safe with me, or even in heart-to-heart, the many businessmen and women that we talk to. I often ask them as they're pouring out their heart, who do you talk to about this? And too often the answer is, gee, Larry, no one. The disconnect, the loneliness, the need to be true, to be real, the need to be with one another, the need to stop talking when you're supposed to. God bless. Let's hear from you, okay? Thank you. Good to be with you this morning.